Be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe for notifications on newly uploaded chapters. To help the channel grow, please share it with others who enjoy high-quality novels. Chapter titles and timelines are provided below.
Chapter 27. When the Body Starts to Whisper. James did not sleep that night. He lay beside Sarah, listening to the soft rise and fall of her breathing, his eyes fixed on the ceiling where moonlight stretched itself in long, pale bands. The house made its usual sounds, a faint creak of the wooden frame settling in the cool hours, the whisper of wind brushing the tin roof, the distant hoot of an owl near the tree line. Yet nothing felt familiar, nothing felt peaceful. The world felt tilted, as if some invisible hand had pressed its weight onto the day and left everything slightly off balance. His back ached fiercely. Every shift in position sent a deep, twisting pain through him. But even if the pain had eased, sleep would not have come. His mind would not quiet. He replayed the moment when the needle sank into his spine. The pressure, the coldness, the strange pull that felt both physical and something beyond the body. It haunted him now, a phantom sensation echoing through his bones. Sarah stirred beside him and turned onto her back. "You are awake," she whispered. "I have not been able to sleep," he said. She turned her face toward him in the dimness. "Your back still hurting?" "Yes," he said, "but that is not all." Sarah pushed herself up on one elbow. Her nightgown rustled softly. "Tell me," she said. James drew a long breath. "I do not feel right," he said finally. "Something about today feels wrong in my spirit. All this time I tried to believe what they told us. I tried to trust. But after today, I keep seeing things in a different light." Sarah reached for his hand in the darkness. "What things?" she asked softly. James thought of Nurse Whitford's trembling voice. He thought of the look in her eyes, the way she could not hold his gaze after the procedure. He thought of Elijah's pale face, Isaac Monroe leaning against the wall, Wiggins nearly collapsing, the doctor's steady, unbothered tone, the cold stare behind those calm instructions. "I think they know something they are not telling us," he said. Sarah exhaled slowly, not in surprise, but in confirmation, as if she had long expected him to arrive at this place. "I have been praying for you to see it," she said. "Not because I want you frightened, but because I want you safe." James stared at the faint outline of the room around them. The dresser, the small rocking chair Sarah used to sit in when Isaac was small, the quilt his mother had sewn years before. Every detail carried the warmth of their life together, yet tonight even these familiar things felt touched by a shadow. "They said this was to help us," he murmured. "Said it was important for our health. Said we would be monitored." Sarah squeezed his hand. "James," she said quietly, "monitored does not mean cared for. Someone can watch you without protecting you." His breath caught at her words. Sarah shifted again so she could see him more clearly. "What did the doctor say afterward?" she asked. James shook his head. "Nothing more than usual. They called it routine. They said it was necessary for the study." "And did Miss Whitford seem like she believed that?" James paused. "No," he admitted. "I do not think she did." Sarah nodded, as if that was the final piece she had been waiting for. "Then we need to act like something is wrong," she said. "We cannot keep going into these tests blind." The word stung so sharply that James flinched. Blind. He did not know why it struck him so deeply, but it did. Sarah caught the sudden change in him. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "I do not know," he said. "Something in me keeps turning that word over, as if it means more than it should." Sarah rested a hand on his chest. "Fear makes the mind do that," she said softly. He placed his hand over hers. "I do not want to make you worry more," he said. Sarah shook her head. "I would rather worry and be prepared," she whispered, "than trust blindly and regret it." James closed his eyes at the truth of it. They lay together in the quiet for several minutes, hands intertwined, hearts beating in unison as if their bodies understood things long before their minds were ready to face them. Eventually, Sarah lowered her head to his shoulder. "What do we do from here?" she asked. James looked toward the window, where a thin slice of moonlight cut across the floor. "We start listening closer," he said. "We watch the men, we ask questions, and if they call us back again, we think long and hard before going." Sarah nodded against him. "That is all I wanted," she whispered, "for you to see that something is not right." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you," he said softly, "for standing beside me, for seeing what I could not." Sarah lifted her head slightly. "Always," she said, "you and me." He answered without hesitation, "Together forever." The words settled between them like a promise renewed. After a while, Sarah drifted back to sleep, her breathing deep and steady. James remained awake, staring into the darkness, while thoughts pressed at him from every direction. The ache in his back deepened. His spine felt strangely warm, almost throbbing. He wondered how long it would last. He wondered what exactly the needle had done. The doctors had not said. They never said more than they needed to. He shifted his weight carefully and rose from the bed, not wanting to disturb Sarah. He padded into the living room and sat in the worn armchair by the window. Outside, the night stretched wide and quiet. Crickets chirped. A dog barked far in the distance. A faint smell of earth drifted through the open window. James leaned forward and pressed his elbows against his knees. He rubbed his face with both hands. He felt old in that moment, older than 26, older than any man his age should ever feel. Isaac appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy?" he said groggily. "You up?" James straightened. "I am here," he said, "could not sleep." Isaac walked to him and climbed slowly onto his lap. James winced as his back protested, but he bit back the sound and wrapped his arms around his son. "You thinking about what happened today?" Isaac asked. James nodded. "A little," he said. "I heard you and Mama talking," Isaac said quietly. "I know you trying to protect us." James let out a slow breath. "I am trying," he said, "more than you know." Isaac rested his head on his father's chest. "I trust you," he murmured. James felt something in his chest tighten. Trust. That sacred thing he had given so freely to the people at the clinic. That gift he now feared he had handed to the wrong hands. He held his son close. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said, "or to Mama." Isaac nodded and closed his eyes again. James rocked him gently until the child fell back asleep. Then he carried him to his room, laid him down carefully, and stood for a long moment watching him breathe. He looked small in the moonlight, small and safe and unaware of the dangers moving silently around them. When James returned to the living room, he did not sit again. He stood by the window, hands braced on the sill, staring into the dark. His thoughts wandered back to the other men. Elijah with his trembling hands, Isaac Monroe breathing through pain, Wiggins leaning against the wall in shock. He thought of the truck, the silence, the fear in their eyes that none of them dared speak aloud. He thought of Shiloh Baptist and Pastor Green. He thought of the conversations that would soon need to happen and the questions that would demand answers. He thought of Miss Whitford's face as she told him everything would be all right, her voice soft yet shaking beneath the surface. And he thought of the men in white coats, standing apart from the world he lived in, speaking in terms of study and observation, their eyes cool and distant. James felt the first true spark of anger rise inside him. It was small, just a flicker, but it was real. He stood at the window until the first faint hint of dawn touched the sky. Only then did he return to bed and lie beside Sarah again. He did not sleep. He did not close his eyes. He watched the room around him slowly brighten as the world woke once more. And with the dawn came a truth he could no longer ignore. Something had changed inside him, something deep, something that would only grow stronger in the days ahead.
Chapter 28. The First Cracks in Sarah. Morning light spilled through the kitchen windows in soft golden ribbons, catching dust motes that drifted lazily in the warm air. Sarah Turner stood at the stove, stirring a pot of grits, while the smell of frying salt pork filled the room. This kitchen had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could hum her hymns, move in rhythm with familiar routines, and keep her family well fed and close. But today her movements were slower. Her shoulders drooped in a way they never had before, and every now and then she paused as if the strength in her arms was not as sure as it used to be. James noticed. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her quietly as the morning sunlight softened the edges of her figure. She looked tired in a way that troubled him. Not tired from lack of sleep. Not tired from chores. Tired in the deeper sense, as if something inside her was pulling more from her body than she could spare. "You feelin' all right?" he asked. Sarah flinched slightly at the sound of his voice, as if pulled back from a faraway thought. She turned toward him and forced a smile that did not fully reach her eyes. "I am fine," she said. "Just did not rest as well as I hoped." James stepped further into the room. "You were up late," he said gently. "I saw your lamp when I went to check on Isaac." Sarah turned back to the stove and stirred the pot again. "I was thinking," she said lightly, "about the things happening around here." Her voice was steady, but he heard the tremor beneath it. Isaac came shuffling into the kitchen, eyes still heavy with sleep. He rubbed his face and climbed onto the bench at the table. "Morning, Mama," he murmured. Sarah turned, her face softening. "Morning, baby. I made your favorite." Isaac gave a small smile, but even he noticed something different about her. He studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You all right, Mama? You look tired." Sarah took a breath. It was a small breath, but heavy at the same time. "I am fine," she repeated, though her voice betrayed her. James stepped beside her and placed a hand on her back. She stiffened slightly under his touch, not because she did not want comfort, but because the simple act sent a pulse of pain through her shoulders. "You do not look fine," he said quietly. Sarah looked down. She did not answer. James lowered his voice even more. "Talk to me." She shook her head. "I do not want you worrying when you already have enough on you." He cupped her chin gently and guided her face toward his. "You and Isaac are never a burden to me," he said. "Your well-being comes before anything. If something is wrong, I need to know." Sarah's throat bobbed. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away quickly. "I feel weak," she whispered, "like my body is heavier than it should be. I woke up with a pain in my joints. It felt like it was deep in the bones, and I have been fighting a headache since the night before." James felt the floor shift beneath him. He kept his voice steady. "Have you felt that before?" She hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "Once or twice these past few weeks. Small pains, a little dizziness, nothing big enough to worry over." "But it is getting worse," James said. She nodded. He looked toward the table where Isaac sat, his spoon resting in his bowl as he watched them both. "Isaac," James said gently, "eat your breakfast. I need to speak with your mama for a moment." Isaac obeyed, though his eyes remained fixed on them. James took Sarah's hand and guided her to sit at the table. She lowered herself into the chair slowly, wincing as she did. He knelt in front of her. "When did this start?" he asked quietly. Sarah clasped her hands together. "Not long after you signed the paper," she said. "At first, I thought it was nothing. Everyone gets tired sometimes. But then I noticed it happening more often. A faint spell here, a sharp ache there." "Why did you not tell me?" James asked. Sarah lowered her head. "Because I did not want to make you worry," she said. "I did not want to be the reason you second-guessed your decision. I know how heavy that has been for you already." James took her hands in his. "I would rather worry and know the truth," he said gently, echoing her words from the night before. "We are supposed to share the weight, remember?" Sarah's lip quivered. "I did not want to add more." James squeezed her hands. "We have faced everything together since the day we met at that little grocery store," he said. "Every joy, every hardship, every hope. Whatever this is, we face it the same way." Sarah nodded, but her eyes filled again. "I just feel so tired," she said. "More tired than I should. Sometimes my legs feel heavy. I thought it was only the stress from everything happening with the doctors, but now I do not know." James swallowed the fear rising inside him. He stood and pulled out the chair beside her. "Let us sit and eat," he said. "Afterward, if you still feel weak, we will let you rest. And tomorrow, if it continues, we will find someone to talk to at the church, maybe Pastor Green." Sarah shook her head softly. "No doctors," she said quickly, her voice trembling with something close to panic. "I do not trust any doctor now, not after what they did to you, not after what I saw when you came home." James sat beside her and placed an arm around her shoulders. "Then we will start with the pastor," he said. "You trust him." Sarah nodded. Her shoulders dropped as if the smallest relief had settled in. Isaac pushed his empty bowl forward. "Mama," he said gently, "I can help with chores today. I can sweep and feed the chickens." Sarah turned toward him with a soft smile. "That would help me a great deal," she said. "Thank you, Isaac." Isaac perked up a little, proud. James watched the exchange, the warmth between mother and son, and felt a swell of love that came with a heavy undertow of fear. After breakfast, Sarah attempted to stand, but her legs wobbled. James reached for her quickly. "I got you," he said. She leaned into him for a moment before steadying herself. "Just a moment of dizziness," she whispered. James helped her to the bedroom so she could lie down. She settled onto the bed slowly, her breath unsteady. "Rest," he said. "I will keep an eye on things." She nodded, closing her eyes. James stepped back into the hallway and pressed his hand against the wall. A rush of fear moved through him, thick and heavy. This was not normal tiredness, not normal aches. Something deeper pulsed beneath her symptoms. He returned to the kitchen where Isaac was washing out his bowl. "Did Mama get worse from being worried about you?" Isaac asked quietly. James knelt beside him. "Your mama worries because she loves us," James said. "But this feels like more than worry. We are going to pay close attention from now on." Isaac nodded slowly. "What do we do if she gets worse?" James's stomach twisted. "We take care of her," he said, "the same way she takes care of us, the same way she always has." Isaac looked down at the dish in his hands. "I am scared, Daddy." James pulled him close. "I am too," he whispered. "But we will get through this, together." Isaac leaned into him, gripping his shirt. James held him tightly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around them like a quiet storm. The kitchen felt smaller. The house felt too still. The distant hum of cicadas outside seemed to echo with an uneasy rhythm. When Isaac went outside to sweep the porch, James returned to the bedroom. Sarah lay curled on her side, breathing softly. Even in rest, her face looked strained. James sat on the edge of the bed and watched her. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His hand trembled. He wanted to believe this would pass. He wanted to believe she was simply tired. He wanted to believe the doctors had not set something terrible in motion. But deep inside, a quiet truth began to move, slow and undeniable. Something was happening to Sarah, something that was only beginning, and the first cracks had now appeared. They could no longer pretend otherwise. James lowered his head and whispered a prayer, one that trembled in his throat. "Lord, please guide me. Please protect my wife. Do not let this be the beginning of something I cannot stop." Outside, the wind shifted, brushing through the tall grass with a sound that felt almost like an answer. But no answer came. Only the quiet, only the uncertainty, only the beginning of something that would test them all. Chapter 29. A House That Can No Longer Hold Its Breath. The late morning sunlight fell across the Turner house in a warm, soft glow. But inside the walls, a different kind of atmosphere settled. It was not light. It was not warmth. It was a quiet heaviness that lingered in corners and clung to the spaces between breaths. The kind of heaviness that makes a home feel like it is waiting for something it does not want to see. James felt it the moment he stepped into the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the table with her arms crossed on the surface, her head resting on them as though the weight of simply holding herself upright had become too much. Her hair spilled across the wood like a dark veil, and when she lifted her head upon hearing him enter, her eyes were slow to focus. "You should resting," James said gently. "I tried," Sarah replied. Her voice sounded thin. She blinked several times as if trying to clear a film from her vision. It felt better to sit up for a while. James crossed the room and placed a hand on the back of her chair. "You slept?" he asked. "A little," she said, "but I woke up sweating, then cold, then sweating again. I could not get comfortable." Her skin looked paler than usual, and there was a sheen of moisture along her forehead despite the morning's mild temperature. He pulled a chair beside her and sat. "We are getting you some real rest today," he said. "Isaac and I will handle everything." Sarah smiled at that, but the smile wavered. "I do not want you two fussing over me," she said. "I am not helpless." James took her hand. "You are not," he said, "but you are tired, and when one of us is tired, the rest carry the weight." She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding softly. James poured her a glass of water and placed it in front of her. Her hand trembled slightly when she reached for it. She noticed the tremor too, and closed her fingers around the cup carefully. "I do not know what is happening to me," she said quietly. He reached across the table and brushed a thumb along her knuckles. "We will figure it out," he said. Sarah took a small sip of water and set the cup down. "Do you still hurt?" she asked. "My back aches some," James admitted, "but I can manage." Sarah looked at him with a kind of mournful tenderness. "I saw the way you moved last night. You could not get comfortable." James leaned back in his chair. "It was a hard test," he said. "I knew it would take a toll." Sarah lowered her eyes. "They should not be doing things like that to you," she said. "Not without explaining what it is. Not without telling you the truth." James had no argument left to offer. The truth had crept into him slowly, weaving itself through every moment of the day before, settling into his chest like a heavy stone. "I know," he said. Sarah's shoulders sagged in quiet relief, as if hearing those two words eased a burden she had been carrying for him. Isaac entered the kitchen then, carrying an armful of kindling he had gathered from outside. He set it by the stove and looked between them. "You need me to draw water from the pump?" he asked. "Yes, please," Sarah said. "Just one bucket. That will do." Isaac nodded and headed back out, eager to be useful. James watched him go and felt a twist of guilt. Isaac was growing up faster than he should have to. The boy had always been observant, but lately he seemed hyper-aware, as if he understood that his childhood had begun to change shape. When James turned back to Sarah, she was staring at her hands. Her fingers were interlocked, knuckles pressed tight. "Sarah," he said softly. She looked up. He reached for her hand again and held it between both of his. "You need rest," he said. "And I need to go check on Elijah and some of the others. They said they wanted to talk more." Sarah hesitated. "You going to talk about the clinic?" He nodded. "It is time," he said. "Too many of us felt something was wrong." Sarah swallowed. "Be careful what you say," she whispered. "They might not like men questioning them." James nodded slowly. "I will not do anything foolish," he said. "We will just talk." Isaac returned with the bucket of water, set it aside, and looked toward Sarah with concern. "You need anything else, Mama?" Sarah smiled weakly. "Maybe just sit with me for a minute," she said. Isaac climbed into the chair beside her and rested his chin on the table, looking up at her with wide eyes full of worry he tried to hide. James stood. "I will go see Elijah," he said. "I will not be long." Sarah's fingers caught his sleeve lightly before he turned. "James," she said, "please do not go far." He touched her cheek. "I will be close," he promised. When he stepped onto the porch, he paused and looked back into the house. Sarah and Isaac sat together at the table. Isaac leaned close to his mother, and she rested a gentle hand on his back. It was a scene of tenderness, but the quiet around it felt strained, like a thread pulled taut. James walked down the road toward Elijah's house, but he did not go far before he ran into something he had not expected. Two neighbors stood in the middle of the road, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were serious, their brows knitted with worry. "You hear about Wiggins?" one asked. "What about him?" the other replied. "He says he could barely stand yesterday. Says his back locked up so hard he thought he would fall." The second man shook his head slowly. "That clinic is doing something to these men," he said, "something they are not telling." When they saw James approaching, they fell quiet for a moment, then nodded to him. "Morning, James," one said. "Morning," James replied. "You two hear much from the others?" The men looked at each other before one answered. "Just that the tests are painful, too painful. Men coming home dizzy, weak, and they say Miss Whitford has been acting strange. She came by my sister's house yesterday, checking on folks, but not really checking, if that makes sense." James frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked worried, like she wanted to say something she could not. James felt a chill creep across his skin. Nurse Whitford had always been composed, always confident. If she was showing worry, that meant she was holding back something significant. "We think something is happening in that clinic that is not for our good," the man continued, "and folks are starting to talk." James nodded slowly. "I am headed to see Elijah now," he said. "We are going to talk more about it." "Well," the neighbor said, stepping closer, lowering his voice, "be careful. The government does not like trouble, and these doctors do not want questions." James met the man's eyes. "I am not picking a fight," he said. "We just need to understand what is happening to us." The men nodded and stepped aside, letting him pass. As James continued down the road, he noticed how the air felt charged. The community was small, but news here traveled like wind across open fields. Fear had a way of spreading quickly, and uncertainty had already begun to take root. When James reached Elijah's house, he found him sitting on the porch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He looked up when James approached. "You hurtin' too?" Elijah asked. "Yes," James said, "but I came to check on you." Elijah rubbed the back of his neck. "My wife is worried," he said. "I told her it was just tests, but she keeps saying something feels wrong. And truth be told, I feel it too." James sat on the top step beside him. "I talked to a couple neighbors," he said. "Wiggins took bad. Monroe, too." Elijah nodded. "I heard," he said. "And James, I do not like that the nurse looks scared." "That is not a good sign." "No," James agreed. "It is not." Elijah shifted nervously. "Think we should gather the men tonight? Not at the church. Maybe at someone's house, quietly." James nodded. "Yes, it is time." The two men sat in silence for a few moments. The wind brushed through the trees behind them. The cicadas began their afternoon hum. Elijah looked at James. "You think our families are safe?" James swallowed hard. "I do not know," he said, "but I intend to make sure they are." After a while, James rose. "I need to get back," he said. "Sarah is not feeling well. She has been weak these past days. I did not know how bad it was." Elijah frowned. "You think she caught something?" "I hope not," James said, "but I am not leaving her alone long." Elijah nodded. James turned toward home, his footsteps quickening with every stride. When he reached the house, he saw something that made his stomach drop. Nurse Whitford stood on the porch. The sight of her filled him with a sudden tension. Sarah was sitting in a chair beside the door, her hands folded in her lap, looking ill and fragile in the mid-afternoon light. James hurried up the steps. "What are you doing here?" he asked, more sharply than he intended. Nurse Whitford turned, her face pale. "I came to check on some of the families," she said. "I wanted to see how everyone was feeling after the tests yesterday." James crossed his arms. "We are managing," he said. "We did not call for you." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to him. "How are you feeling today, Sarah?" she asked. Sarah looked away. "I am tired," she said faintly. "My joints ache. I feel hot and cold." "I do not want any more tests." Evelyn's eyes softened. "No more tests today," she said gently. "I only came to see how you were doing." James stepped closer. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you need to check on her?" Evelyn hesitated. "I just need to make sure the families are all right after such procedures," she said, but her voice trembled. James stared at her. "You know something," he said quietly. "You've been acting different. You are nervous. You are hiding something." Evelyn swallowed. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her clipboard. "I cannot say anything," she whispered. "I should not be here long." "Then why come?" James pressed. "Because I needed to see her," Evelyn said softly. "And I needed to see you." Her voice cracked. Sarah leaned forward slightly. "What is happening, Miss Whitford?" she asked. Evelyn blinked rapidly, her eyes filling with tears she tried to blink away. "I cannot answer that," she said, voice breaking. "Not yet, but I need you both to be careful. Be very careful." James felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" he asked. Evelyn stepped back, gripping the railing as if steadying herself. "I should go," she whispered. "Just please watch your health closely, especially you, Sarah. If anything gets worse, come find me. Quietly. Do not go to the doctors." Sarah's face paled. James grabbed the railing. "Why?" he demanded. Evelyn shook her head. "I cannot say," she said, "but please believe me, something is not right." She backed down the steps, almost stumbling as she turned away. She hurried down the road without looking back. James stood frozen. Sarah sat trembling in the chair. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Sarah whispered the question they both feared. "James, what is happening to us?" James lowered his head. "I do not know," he said, "but whatever it is, it has already begun." The house felt smaller now, the air heavier. A shadow of fear settled across the porch, quiet and deep. And in that moment, James understood something he had not fully allowed himself to accept until now. Their lives had entered a new stage, a stage where trust no longer lived, a stage where every breath felt like a warning, a stage where the first cracks had begun to split wide. Chapter 30. The Final Night. The house was unusually still that evening, the kind of quiet that seemed to rest on the walls themselves. Outside, a soft breeze moved through the trees, brushing the leaves together in a faint, restless whisper. The sky had already begun to darken into a deep blue that lay low and heavy over Macon County. Nothing about that night looked different from the nights before it, except to the man who stood at the edge of his own doorway, unable to shake the feeling that something inside the house was shifting. James stepped carefully out of his work shoes and set them beside the door. His hands ached from the day's labor. His vision, which had been growing less reliable with every passing month, blurred the edges of the hallway. He blinked a few times, trying to steady the shadows. "Sarah?" he called softly. "I am home." The faint clatter of a dish from the kitchen answered him. It was a small sound, but it steadied him for a moment. Isaac appeared first, his steps quick and anxious. "Daddy," he said, tugging on James's sleeve, "Mama is tired again." James placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Is she lying down?" "She was, but she got up. She said she needed to finish supper, but she kept stopping. I think she was waiting on you." The words caught him off guard. "Waiting on me?" Isaac nodded. She asked what time you would be back. She asked twice. James swallowed. Sarah rarely asked after him like that. She was the kind of woman who waited quietly, always trusting he would return when he could. He walked toward the kitchen. The shift in light made his vision waver. He blinked again. The world around him dimmed at the edges, like smoke creeping in from someplace unseen. Lately, everything felt muted. Faces blurred into softer shapes. He had started memorizing his family's outlines more than their details, storing their silhouettes in his mind like precious things he feared he might lose. The closer he came to the kitchen, the heavier the air felt. He stepped into the doorway and saw her. Sarah stood with one hand braced against the counter, her back slightly bent, as if something inside her had pulled downward. Her simple cotton dress hung loosely now, the fabric gathering at her waist in a way that made her look smaller than she had ever looked. In the dim light, her skin had taken on a pale, waxy sheen. Even her hair, once full and soft, seemed thinner, as if whatever was touching her life was brushing the brightness out of it, bit by bit. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "You are home," she whispered. The sound of her voice made something inside him tighten. It was soft, breathy, thinner than it should have been. She offered him a smile, but it wavered before it reached her eyes. "You should be resting," he said, stepping closer. "I wanted to have supper ready," she said, picking up a spoon with trembling fingers. "You have been working so hard." He took the spoon gently out of her hand and set it aside. "Sit," he said. "Sit down, sweetheart." She hesitated, as if unsure she had enough strength to argue or obey. Then she let him guide her to the small table, lowering herself slowly into the chair. Isaac hovered in the doorway, chewing on his bottom lip. James looked at him. "Go wash up, son. I will finish things here." Isaac nodded and disappeared down the hall. James turned back to Sarah. "How long have you felt this way?" She shook her head softly. "I do not know. A while. It comes and goes." "It is worse," he said gently. She did not answer. He knelt beside her and took her hand. It felt colder than it should have been. The thin bones in her wrist shifted under his fingers like fragile twigs. He rubbed her forearm slowly, trying to coax warmth back into her limbs. Her eyes drifted toward the window. "The light outside looks strange tonight," she murmured. James blinked. His own eyes struggled to focus. The lamp overhead seemed to flicker, though he could not tell whether it was the lamp itself or simply the world as he now saw it. "Everything has looked strange lately," he admitted. "I am having a little trouble with my sight." She looked back at him, alarm flickering through her expression. "How long?" James hesitated. "A while." "Why did you not tell me?" He shook his head. "I did not want to worry you, not when you have not been feeling well." She let out a soft sigh, a tired breath that seemed to sink into the room. "You should have told me," she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "I know." A quiet moment settled between them. Then she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "James, I feel off." He straightened. "Off how?" Her eyes fluttered closed. "Everything aches, and sometimes it feels like something is crawling inside my bones, like my blood is heavy." He froze. Slowly, his fingers tightened around hers. "I am going to call someone," he said. "I cannot let you sit here suffering." "No," she said, her voice sharper than before. "Do not bring them here again. I do not want those doctors touching me." He swallowed hard. She had never spoken so plainly about them until now. "Sarah," he began, but she shook her head. "Do not ask me why," she whispered. "I can feel something is wrong. Something about all of this is wrong. I trust you, but I do not them." Her voice trembled. He rose and moved behind her chair, rubbing her shoulders with steady hands. The motion was slow, meant to soothe her, meant to calm the fear she struggled to keep buried. She leaned back into his touch, closing her eyes again. "James," she said softly, "sit with me, just for a moment." He pulled a chair beside her and took both of her hands in his. "I am here." She opened her eyes and looked at him fully. For a moment, she seemed clearer, more herself, as if the failing light inside her flickered back to life for one last glow. "Do you remember when Isaac was born?" she asked. He nodded. "I do." "You cried," she said, a faint smile forming. "You tried to hide it, but you did." "I had never seen anything so perfect," he said. "Not before him, not even before you." Her smile deepened, but stayed small. "I remember thinking," she whispered, "that I had everything I ever prayed for. A husband who loved me, a home, a baby. I thought the world was steady, and we would be safe." "We were safe," he said quietly. "We are safe." She lifted her fingers and brushed them against his cheek. Her hand trembled, but the touch was warm and familiar. "You always say you will take care of me," she said. "I will," he whispered. "Always." She closed her eyes again, and he tightened his grip on her hands. "I am going to carry you to bed," he said. "You should lie down." She nodded once. He lifted her in his arms. The weight of her startled him. She felt too light, as if sickness had hollowed her from the inside. He carried her slowly, careful not to stumble in the dim hallway. His fading vision made the shadows seem to swell, but he walked steadily, guided by memory more than sight. He laid her down on their bed and smoothed the blankets over her. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, each breath thinner than the one before. He sat beside her, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "James," she whispered. "I am here." Her eyes opened, glassy and distant. "Will you lie with me?" He climbed onto the bed and settled beside her, one arm sliding under her shoulders, the other resting across her stomach. She curled into him, her breath warming his collarbone. He closed his eyes and held her close, listening to the faint, fragile rhythm of her breathing. After a long moment, she spoke again. "James?" "Yes, sweetheart." Her breath hitched. "Do you remember what you always say to me?" He pressed his lips to her forehead. "You and me." She exhaled, the faintest smile touching her lips. "Together forever," she whispered. The words were soft, almost weightless. He felt her hand relax in his, felt her chest rise once more, felt the faintest tremble slip through her body. Then she grew very still, so still he felt the world tilt. "Sarah?" he whispered. She did not answer. He waited. One breath. 2. 3. "Sarah," he said again, panic rising in his throat. He shifted, his fingers moving to her wrist. He pressed lightly, searching for the small, familiar pulse. There was none. "No," he whispered. "No, sweetheart. No." He leaned over her, his forehead resting against hers. "Please," he whispered. "Not yet. Please, not yet." The room did not change. The shadows did not move. The house did not stir. Only the absence of her breath told him what he could not bear to believe. He gathered her tightly in his arms and held her as if holding her long enough might warm her back to life. His tears slid silently down his cheeks, falling onto the pillow beside her. "Sarah," he said her name again and again, as if the sound might call her back. But the room remained still. The house remained quiet. And James, who had carried so many burdens without letting his knees buckle, finally bowed his head and wept the way a man weeps when the center of his world slips from his hands. He did not know how long he held her. Time felt strange, stretched thin and fraying. His vision, already clouded, blurred even further until the room dissolved into nothing but shapes and sorrow. At some point he felt a small hand touch his shoulder. He lifted his head. Isaac stood beside the bed, his eyes wide and shining with confusion and fear. "Daddy," he whispered, Why is Mama not moving? James reached for his son, but could not find words. He gathered Isaac against his side, holding him close, letting the boy's tears fall onto his arm. "We are right here," James said softly, though the words trembled. "We are right here with her." Father and son stayed beside her until the night dissolved into morning. The sun rose slowly, spilling pale light across the bed. James still held his wife. Isaac still held his father. And Sarah, who had loved them with all the strength she had, lay silent in the place where her heart had once beaten steady against theirs. Chapter 31. Darkness at the Edges. The days after Sarah's burial blurred together, each one folding into the next like pages in a book James was too weary to read. The world had not stopped for his grief. The sun continued to rise. The chickens still needed feeding. The fields still demanded tending. Isaac still needed meals, clothes, guidance, and comfort. It was life moving forward, indifferent to a heart that refused to follow. James carried on because he had no choice. Yet something inside him had shifted so profoundly that even the simplest tasks felt foreign. He first noticed it early one morning while chopping wood behind the house. The sun had barely risen, but enough light stretched across the yard to outline the trees and cast long shadows on the ground. James lifted the axe and swung it downward, splitting the log cleanly. He wiped the sweat from his brow and bent to adjust the next piece of wood. When he straightened, a sudden blur washed across his vision. It came and went so quickly that he froze, blinking at the trees. The shapes wavered like heat rising off a road. The colors blurred together in a faint haze. He blinked again and rubbed his eyes. The trees came back into focus. He shook his head, confused but not yet alarmed. He told himself it was probably from lack of sleep. He had not slept a full night since Sarah's passing. Some nights he lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Isaac's soft breathing in the next room. Other nights he drifted off, only to be startled awake by memories of Sarah's last moments. Still, something about the blur unsettled him. He returned to the woodpile and lifted the axe again, telling himself he was imagining things. But the blur returned 2 days later. This time it happened in the middle of the day while he walked through the field behind the house. Isaac had been playing nearby with a stick, pretending it was a sword. The sky was clear, the sunlight warm. James was checking the soil when the world dimmed around the edges of his sight. It was not a full darkness, more like the shadows had grown teeth and were slowly closing in. He blinked hard, trying to push the dimness away. It receded slightly, then returned. Isaac called to him, "Daddy, look what I found!" James looked toward his son. The boy's shape was solid in the center of his vision, but the edges flickered and quivered. He could not make out the details around him. "Daddy?" James forced a smile. "I see it, son. Come on over here." As Isaac ran toward him, the dimming eased. The world steadied again, though a faint pressure lingered at the back of James's eyes. That night, he did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with only the kerosene lamp burning, the soft flame casting shadows across the room. The house felt hollow. Every sound echoed. Even his own breathing seemed too loud. He rested his elbows on the table and pressed his palms to his eyes. Something was wrong. He tried to tell himself it was grief, or exhaustion, or overwork. Men had gone half-blind before from years of sunlight and strain. But deep inside, a quiet fear grew roots he could not ignore. He thought of the doctors, the needles, the tests, the promises, the words they used, the way their eyes never quite matched their smiles. A chill crawled across his skin. Could what they did be causing this? He did not know. He was not a doctor. He was not a man of science. He was a man of the land, of sweat and labor and faith. All he knew was that something was happening in his vision that had never happened before, and it was getting worse. The next morning, he tried to button his shirt, but his fingers stumbled. His depth perception felt off. The buttons shifted and wavered. He blinked, frustrated, and tried again. "Daddy, can I help?" Isaac stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, his small hands half raised in an offer. James forced a steady breath. "I can manage, Isaac, thank you." But he could not. His fingers shook. He finally gave up and buttoned the shirt crookedly. Isaac watched him with a quiet concern that made James's chest ache. Later that day, while tending to the garden, the dimming returned stronger than before. The center of his vision held firm, but everything beyond it faded to a smoky blur. The edges of the world seemed to dissolve. He planted his hoe into the soil and gripped it tightly, trying to remain upright. He squeezed his eyes shut, counted to 5, and opened them. The blur lingered another moment before receding, but this time it left a dull throb behind. James leaned against the shed, breathing hard. He could not tell Isaac. The boy was grieving enough. He needed stability, not fear. So James lied. When Isaac asked if he wanted help in the garden, James said he was fine. When Isaac asked why he was moving slower, James said he was tired. When Isaac begged him to rest, James said he would after he finished just one more thing. In truth, the fear was spreading faster than the darkness. That evening, James went to Shiloh Baptist for the Wednesday prayer service. He hoped it might steady him, give him something solid to hold on to. When he walked inside, several church members greeted him with warm, sorrowful eyes. Sister Lottie hugged him. "We are still praying for you and Isaac," she said. James nodded, trying to focus on her face. For a second, her features blurred before sharpening again. He blinked quickly so she would not notice. Reverend Coleman stood at the front of the sanctuary where the choir usually gathered. He offered James a gentle nod of welcome. James moved to a pew near the back, not wanting to draw attention. As the service began, the familiar hymns washed over him. People sang softly, their voices weaving a blanket of comfort. James closed his eyes. This time, when he opened them, the blur was still there. It pulsed at the edges of his sight, like a darkness waiting to move inward. He reached for the pew in front of him, gripping it until his knuckles whitened. By the end of the service, the dimness had retreated enough that he could walk outside without stumbling. The night air was cooler than usual. Crickets chorused from the bushes. He stood beneath the stars, breathing slowly. "Brother James." He turned. Reverend Coleman approached, his expression thoughtfully observant. "How are you holding up?" the Reverend asked. James swallowed. "Trying," he said. The Reverend nodded. "Grief has a way of playing tricks on the body. It shows up in ways we do not expect. Fatigue, loss of appetite, dizziness." James stilled. Had he seen something in James's eyes? Was he guessing? Or was it simply a coincidence that his words brushed so close to the truth? The Reverend placed a hand on his shoulder. "Lean on us if you need to," he said softly. "You are not alone." James nodded again. But he felt alone, terrifyingly so. When he returned home, he found Isaac asleep at the table with his head cradled in his arms. James lifted him gently and carried him to bed, his steps slow and careful. On the way to the bedroom, the hallway darkened at the edges again. His vision flickered like an old lamp about to die. He stopped, heart pounding. He blinked again, and the hallway returned, but the moment had been unmistakable. He was losing his sight. He tucked Isaac into bed, brushed the hair from his forehead, and whispered good night. Then he returned to the kitchen and sat at the table, staring at his own trembling hands. A faint knock came at the door. James stiffened. He opened the door to find Evelyn Whitford standing on the porch, her hat in her hands, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "James," she whispered, "may I speak with you?" He hesitated before nodding. She stepped inside, her gaze flicking around the room as if searching for signs of Sarah's presence and finding only absence. "I have been thinking about you and Isaac," she said. "I wanted to check on you." "We are managing," he replied. She studied his face, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes, a dimming, a a shadow of confusion. Her breath caught, but she forced composure. "Have you been feeling unwell?" she asked carefully. James's jaw tightened. "Just tired." "James," she said softly, "if something is wrong, you should tell someone." He stared at her, something deep and wary stirring.
"Why?" he asked. "Would it change anything?" Evelyn froze. He was not accusing her, but the edge in his voice cut her more deeply than any direct accusation could have. She stepped back, her voice trembling. "If you ever need anything, I am here." She turned and left before he could say anything else. James closed the door slowly, leaning his forehead against it. The fear inside him no longer felt quiet. It felt alive. That night, when he lay in bed, the darkness did not fade. It hovered at the edges of his vision like a silent tide waiting to rise. And James understood that whatever strength he still had was about to be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. Evelyn had always believed herself to be a woman of reason. She had taken pride in the steadiness of her hands, in her ability to keep things orderly, in her talent for following rules even when others faltered. For most of her life, she had been the kind of person others trusted. People leaned on her when things fell apart. She never leaned back. But in the days after Sarah Turner's burial, something inside Evelyn began to crumble with a quiet and persistent force that terrified her. It was not the loud kind of breaking that came with shouting or dramatic collapse. It was slower. It was internal. It was the kind of breaking that did not show itself all at once, but rather in small, cracking fissures that ran deeper each day. To the world, she appeared the same. She still dressed neatly each morning. She still walked into the clinics with her head held high. She still greeted people with warm eyes that suggested comfort, even when she felt none. But beneath her pressed uniform and calm voice, Evelyn felt herself unraveling. She could not forget the sight of James at the graveyard, standing beside the mound of fresh earth that marked the end of the only woman he had ever loved. She could not forget the hollow look in his eyes as he held Isaac's hand. She could not forget the tremble in her own hands when she offered her condolences and found herself unable to speak a single honest word. She could not forget that she had helped lead Sarah to that grave. The morning after the burial, Evelyn stood in her small kitchen gripping the edge of the counter. The room felt too bright. Her breath caught, and she leaned forward, trying to steady herself. "Evelyn, you need to get control of yourself," she whispered. "You need to breathe." She did breathe, but it did not help. Nothing seemed to help anymore. The guilt had become a living thing inside her, expanding like a lung pulling in air. The men at the federal building had insisted that the study was important. They had insisted that the data would lead to better understanding of disease. They had insisted that the subjects were stable and unlikely to seek treatment. They had insisted that her involvement was essential. But they had never once mentioned what would happen to the wives. They had never spoken her name, Sarah Turner, or any other woman's name. They had spoken only of subjects and samples and data points. Now Evelyn could not stop seeing Sarah's face, the slow fading of her strength, the fear hiding behind her smile, the way she held on to James in those last moments, seeking comfort in the man who had unknowingly carried death into their home because he had trusted the people working alongside Evelyn. Evelyn pressed her hands to her face and prayed for the trembling to stop. Later that afternoon, she reported to the district clinic for her routine paperwork. The waiting room was quiet. A few mothers with young children sat on the benches. A man with a cough filled out a form. Evelyn greeted them with gentle nods, forcing her voice into a steady softness. Behind the closed door of the back office, she sat at her desk and stared down at the forms in front of her. They blurred. She blinked hard and adjusted her glasses. She tried to write. Her pen shook. She tried to focus. Her mind drifted relentlessly to James. She saw again the vacant look in his eyes when she had visited the house after the burial. She remembered the way he had said, "Would it change anything?" as though he already sensed that the doctors had not told the truth. She set the pen down and covered her face with both hands. A soft knock came at the office door.
Miss Whitford?" She straightened quickly, wiping her eyes with her fingertips. "Yes, come in." A young colleague, Nurse Lillian Carver, stepped inside carrying a folder. "You all right?" Lillian asked, her voice full of concern. "You look pale." "I am just tired," Evelyn said quickly. "Long week." Lillian hesitated. "We have all been thinking about Sarah Turner. It is a terrible thing. She was loved." The words pierced Evelyn's heart like a needle. "She was," Evelyn whispered. Lillian stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Some of the folks are wondering if the study has anything to do with her passing. They have not said it aloud, not directly, but you know how people are when tragedy comes." Evelyn's breath caught. "And what do you think?" she asked, with a brittle calm. Lillian looked startled. She shifted uncomfortably. "I think people always try to blame something when life feels unfair." Evelyn nodded, though her stomach twisted. "Thank you, Lillian. I will finish the paperwork." When Lillian left, Evelyn sat alone in the quiet office, absorbing what had just been said. People were wondering. They were starting to question. The truth was near the surface, and it terrified her. Not because she feared losing her job, but because she knew the weight of the truth would destroy the people she cared about. By evening, she had finished her shift and returned home. She removed her uniform carefully, as though peeling away a layer of guilt with each button. She washed her hands, although they were already clean. She cooked a small meal she barely touched. She sat at her table with a cup of tea that went cold, untouched. A soft tapping at her window startled her. It was only wind brushing against the pane, but she felt as if someone were standing outside watching her, not with malice, but with the unspoken expectation that she speak the truth. She went to bed early, but sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it brought dreams that felt more like memories. She saw the first day she had walked into the study. She saw the smiling faces of the men at Shiloh Baptist who trusted her simply because she was someone they recognized. She saw the doctors praising her for her reliability. She saw the forms she had filed, the lies she had told through gentle smiles, the reassurances she had offered without understanding the cost. She woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The sheets clung to her skin. Her breath came fast. She realized suddenly that she could not continue like this. She had to try to speak. She had to try to tell James something. Even if she could not tell the full truth, she could at least warn him. She could at least let him know he should not trust the government any longer. The morning came with soft light filtering through her bedroom curtains. Evelyn dressed slowly, her mind still unsettled but determined. She walked across town to the Turner home, each step heavy with fear and purpose. When she reached the house, she hesitated on the porch. She placed her hand on the railing to steady herself. The wood felt warm beneath her palm. She knocked lightly. James answered. His appearance startled her. He looked older, worn, almost hollow. His eyes were unfocused for a moment, as though searching for clarity. When he finally recognized her, he straightened. "Miss Whitford," he said. "James," she whispered. "I came to check on you and Isaac." He stepped aside and let her in. The house felt different now. Sarah's presence was gone, leaving behind an emptiness that made every room feel too large. Toys were scattered in a neat corner. A half-folded blanket lay on the sofa. A plate sat in the sink, unwashed. It was the home of a man trying to hold himself together for his child. Evelyn clasped her hands in front of her. "How is Isaac?" "He is quiet," James said. "He tries to be brave." "And you?" she asked. James paused. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Inside my head, it feels like someone took the walls away. Everything echoes." Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart tighten. She had come here intending to speak, but now that she stood before him, the words lodged in her throat. She forced herself to continue. "James, I want to ask you something. Have you felt unwell lately?" He hesitated. A flicker of suspicion flashed across his face. "Why do you ask?"
"You look tired," she said, "and Sarah's passing. It is natural for the body to react to grief." James looked away. "I am fine." She could not tell if he meant it or if he simply wanted to end the conversation. She took a step closer. "If anything changes, if anything feels wrong—" His eyes hardened. "Miss Whitford," he said quietly, "would it make a difference?" She froze. "This study you all brought to us," he said. "I trusted you. Sarah trusted you. You said everything would be all right. You said it was for our benefit." His voice did not rise. It did not tremble with anger. It trembled with hurt. Evelyn felt her throat close. She wanted to fall to her knees and confess everything. She wanted to tell him about the meetings, the memos, the lies, the deception. She wanted to tell him that his wife had never been counted, that the government saw him as a subject and not a man, that she herself had been used as the face of trust to conceal betrayal. But she could not speak. Fear and shame pressed down on her like iron. Her lips parted, but no words came. James watched her silently. She turned away before he could see her cry. "I am sorry," she whispered. She fled the house, her steps uneven and hurried. She reached the edge of his property, pressed her hand against a tree trunk, and broke down in tears. She wept until her body shook, until her breath came in ragged gasps. She understood now. She would break entirely if she stayed silent. She would break entirely if she spoke. There was no safe path left, only a choice between courage and cowardice. And though she did not know it yet, this moment of collapse was the beginning of the decision that would one day bring her back to James, trembling and frail, carrying the truth in her hands like a confession meant for a priest. For now, she wept in the shade of the tree, believing herself alone. But the world was already shifting. The truth was moving toward the surface, and her breaking was only the first crack.